Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And we're just going to wait another minute or so, let folks filter in and get settled. Thanks a lot for joining us. We'll begin in a moment.
All right. You hearing us, Crystal?
Yeah, hearing you loud and clear.
Okay, better connection, hardwired.
Thanks everybody for joining us. We're going to get started here in just a few seconds.
Yeah, okay.
And in the meantime, to everybody who's joined our webinar, go ahead and put in the chat the city that you're joining us from. Welcome. We'll get started in just a moment.
I'm going back. What's that?
Wow, we are seeing a lot of folks. Thank you so much for joining us. Juneau, Homer, Seattle, Virginia, Oregon. This is wonderful. Okay, I think we're going to get started. Thanks again, everyone. Welcome. And thanks for joining us. My name is Crystal Gardner. I'm with Alaska Endeavour. And we really appreciate you tuning in to this live webinar to hear from our team, our expedition team, about what they found in their search for the Star of Bengal. Before I introduce Patsy, I'd like to let you know that we are recording this webinar and it will be available on our website, alaskaendeavour.org. So you check that out in a few days. And as we go along, feel free to type any questions that you might have into the Q&A section rather than into the chat. So put those questions into the Q&A section. And if you can also mention which person you are directing the question to, that would be very helpful. So with that, welcome again. And to tell you a little bit about Alaska Endeavour and what we do, here is the Vice President of Alaska Endeavour, Patsy Urschel.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. You're joining us in the salon of the Endeavour. We're an 8-person team. We just got back from the Star of Bengal expedition. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about Alaska Endeavour. We're based in Petersburg, Alaska. We're a nonprofit organization that's devoted to supporting scientists who are looking at the nature, the history, and the culture of Alaska. We support them by using our 72-foot T-boat research vessel Endeavour in the many waterways of Alaska. We work from Ketchikan to the Bering Sea, and our work on top of the support for scientists is to share their data and their research. We want people to have a sense of the true wildness of Alaska. We want people to understand the power of it and support conservation. I'm going to turn this over to Bill to say a little bit about this expedition.
This expedition was to find the wreck of the Star of Bengal. The Star of Bengal was a 264-foot schooner, an iron-hulled schooner, a sailing ship built in the same shipyard in Ireland that the Titanic had been built in. But by the time it had been acquired by Alaska Packers Association, that's the organization that ran many of the canneries up here, it was already well past its prime. It didn't have a motor in it, and the age of steam had definitely arrived, but it was economical, which is why they bought it. It left the cannery at Wrangell, and we're anchored very close to the cannery site now. It left on the morning of September 19th, 1908. And according to the official wreck report, there were 137 people on board and a lot of canned salmon. It was all headed to San Francisco at the end of the season. There were 27 white crewmen and 110 Asian, mostly Chinese cannery workers on board. The ship, because it was large and ungainly, was being towed by two small aging tugboats, the Kayak and the Hattie Gage. The tugs towed the ship west on their state and down towards the open ocean. They were almost clear of the land, almost clear of Coronation Island when a storm came up. The tugs had gotten the ship in the fog too close to the island and its rocky lee shore. They tried to turn the bow of the ship away from the island, but that would mean pulling the bow through the wind. And unfortunately, Hattie Gage had mechanical problems, had to drop off, and the Kayak all by itself, being old and underpowered, couldn't do it. And they ended up having to cut the tow line and let the ship fend for itself. The Kayak and the Hattie Gage then ran for safety in a cove in Warren Island and left the Star of Bengal to its own devices. The crew of the Star got both of their anchors down, but they were pretty close to the shore, and the storm was big enough they dragged. And in the dark, the ship broke against the rocks. Water was filled with wreckage, canned salmon, oil drums, and the men trying to swim for the shore were essentially mangled, torn to pieces, trying to get through the wreckage. Of the 27 crew, 15 of them died. Of the 110 workers, 97 of them died. The tugs returned either the next morning or soon thereafter. The record's a little hazy, and pulled the survivors off the beach. A few days later, a burial crew arrived from Wrangell, had been hired by the Alaska Packers Association to dig graves. Basically, they dug individual graves for the 15 white crewmen and one mass grave for the Asian workers. Somebody on that burial crew had a camera, probably a little brownie, and took pictures. We have copies of those pictures. One of the interesting things about this lost wreck is that it's never really been lost. Its location was pretty well reported at the time. Of course, this is before GPS or even Loran. But even more recently than that, people have stumbled across it. A guy named Frank Sarber dove it in 1966 and again in 1971. Another diver named Bruce, who asked us not to reveal his last name, dove it again in 1998. And interestingly, Gig Decker, who was with us on our expedition, you'll hear from him in a minute, thought he dove it, also in 1998, but we determined that that was probably another dive site. But even with those dives, we have people coming up to us on the dock here in Wrangell telling us where to find the wreck. And we have at least one comment on our website about where to find the wreck. So its precise location has never been documented. To our knowledge, never have the GPS coordinates been taken. And there's never been any diagnostic work. Diagnostic work would be the hard science proving that without any scientific doubt, this is the wreck of the Star of Bengal. So that was our mission. It was to go and definitively locate the wreck with the GPS coordinates and find some diagnostic evidence that proved beyond a reasonable doubt that we had the right ship. We also wanted to perform a remembrance or a memorial on the beach for the lost workers and the crewmen. But more than that, we wanted to understand the story better and tell the story. So that's what this mission was about. and we're going to pass this on to Rachel and Gig Decker.
All right. Well, I guess I'll go first. I'm Rachel. I'm an artist from Alaska. I met Bill and Patsy Urschel actually last year. This is my fourth trip in the Endeavour. But I've been to Coronation Island 35 years ago in 1987 and just fell in love with the island. And always wanted to go back. Fell in love with the geology. There's these really cool sea caves there. And oh, by the way, as I told Bill, there's a shipwreck. And that's where one thing started leading to another. And I began to be the connector in this whole story. And one of my first connections was with Jenya Anichenko, as we realized we needed a marine archaeologist. So I reached out to her. And then from there, following my cues, the next connection was Gig Decker. And here's Gig.
Okay, Gig Decker. I've been a commercial fisherman and diver for 49 years in Alaska. And I love history, maritime history, and I fell in love with the story of the Bengal. And my position in the group is really simple, is that I've always wanted to see the story and the history of the Bengal and the history of the immigrant workers in our industry elevated to a level that I felt that it deserved. And I think it's, as a Wrangellite and as a Alaskan fisherman, my life has been entwined with all the people that work in the canneries and the ships. And I've always felt that the Star of Bengal really represented a lot of important aspects of our industry that we need to understand. And I've always felt that the immigrants' role in the industry has been very, very much understated. So I was really happy to see a professional team that could not only investigate the whereabouts of the wreck, but the historical perspectives, the forensic analysis of the sites, and it has really been exciting for me to see it unfold. And I think that other than just finding the wreck, I think that we've accomplished a lot in studying it and bringing the value of it out. So I'm pretty happy about it.
Gig, you reached out to me about, I think, 15 years ago about helping with the memorial. Right?
Yeah, the Wrangell Mariners Memorial, it has included a 3-foot polycarbonate etching of the Star of Bengal. And we have a section of memorial that is going to be reserved for the names of the people that died on the Bengal. And that's the next step, particularly for me, is to try to keep the fire lit under finding those names.
You guys introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Shawn Dilles from Virginia. I'm an amateur historian. And
A little stage direction here.
I've sailed with Bill before in a study of glaciers in the Kenai Peninsula area, where we did a little science project you can find on the website. Bill mentioned his interest in the Star of Bengal, and kind of committed to, if there's anything I can do to help narrow down the search area, I might be able to do that. And so he gave me that opportunity. As Bill said, this has been a real team effort. People have been looking at and for the Bengal for a long time, and had done a lot of work to do that. So a fellow named Mike Burwell pulled together a database of a lot of the reports that are out there. They're pretty much online. We stumbled through the archives in San Francisco and here in Wrangell in the Nolan Center and found the historic photos. And then it became a matter of trying to line up the right photos. And Bill, do we have one of those sets of photos?
Yeah, why don't you keep talking?
So everybody has a place where the Bengal is supposed to be, but the idea was that if we could find a precise match with the historical record, then we'd know that we were very, very close to the wreck site. Also, Frank Sarber, over 60 years ago, through some means of hard work and or local knowledge, was able to find and dive the site twice. And 30 years ago, another diver, Bruce, was very gracious and forthcoming with sharing the information that Frank Sarber had passed to him. So this is very much a generational lore thing. And so we just, in an effort to bring some scientific instruments to the specific search area, narrowed it down. So
We've got a photo on. screen.
Crystal, are we seeing the photos rock side by side?
I'm seeing that you're screen sharing and the image is probably coming up shortly. I don't see anything yet.
this is the beach.
Yeah, the beach. No, I've got it up on my screen. It's got an idea.
Sure.
So
describe
what
it.
Bill is pulling up is a photograph taken in 1908 by someone on the beach where the dead bodies and where the survivors made it to shore. And from that beach, the photographer is standing behind a rock at the shoreline and looking out toward where the wreck happened. It's the annotation of the photo says. And so we were able to confirm, I think Ray and Tessa took the actual photo on the beach of the same orientation so that we knew there was a lock. There were 4 other photos that are a little bit more revealing of this specific site that we're not using here. And I wasn't sure until we actually got to the site that those other 4 represented the same spot, or if there were other coves or other spots. And the one that Gig drove looks very, very similar, almost identical. And the photo perspective looked like it could have been in either place. And so really getting there was key. Is that up, Crystal?
No, we'll
Okay,
put it on the site.
be on the site, and you'll be able to see that we're very confident and that we got to the right place. So just a shout out to the extended Bengal team, not only here, but of everyone who's worked on this over the years, to Bruce, to Server, to Gig, who helped get me excited as well about the commitment in Wrangell to the memory of this event. Tessa?
Great, so just checking, we don't have images.
No,
Okay,
Describe them.
yeah, well,
pretend it's a radio podcast.
all right, my name's Tessa Hulls. My name is also Coronation, and I got brought on board for this expedition because once the story of the Bengal started being more deeply explored, and it was a story about these lost Asian cannery workers, it became important to really try and humanize these men who were on the boat. And one of the things that I really want to emphasize is in the way that the wreck is written about, these men are often referred to as just Chinese. I want to make clear that they were Chinese, Japanese, and Filipino. So my interest and area of expertise is in placing the demographics of these lives that were lost within the broader context of Asians in the cannery system. And essentially people know the story that the Chinese built the railroads, but there is an equally rich maritime history. And I'm very sad I can't show you pictures because I'm a research deep diver, and I think the images I wanted to show you would really bring this to life. But essentially what happened is after Chinese were brought out to the West Coast building the railroads, many of them came up north to Alaska, and they had essentially a labor monopoly on these cannery crews. So if you were to go into a cannery in small town Alaska, you would see almost entirely Chinese workers up until the early 1900s. But when the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed in 1882, what that meant was that that influx of Chinese workers could no longer be in the United States. So at that point, you started to see more Japanese workers coming in, but then of course you have internment, and then you start to see Filipinos coming into the workforce because they were considered non-citizen US nationals. So the way that these systems worked is that a Chinese labor contractor would provide the crew for the entire cannery season. And this was kind of a way for the Alaska Packers Association to not have to take any responsibility for creating humane conditions for those workers. They were very much mistreated. They would often have their wages stolen. They were beholden to the company store. So there were tactics like they wouldn't be fed enough, or they would be fed overly salty food, so that they were forced to essentially buy their meals at like a 3 times price markup from the company store, so that sometimes they would come up for the whole season and go back after working the cannery lines with no money. the part of the story that I really started working on was combing through the historical record and seeing the wide discrepancy in the numbers and accounts of who died and how they were treated. One of the most striking things that I found was one of the primary documents described that the survivors on the shore took all of the bodies, put them in a pile, and then went through them to pull the white bodies for burial while leaving the Asian bodies on the beach. And part of what has been really motivating and heartbreaking about this historical record is that all of the newspaper articles refer to the exact names, ranks, even family members of the white men. So we know the name of every single white person who died on the ship. And then they'll say, and about 100 Asiatics, about 100 Orientals, about 100 word I'm not going to say. So what I've been trying to do is really humanize these workers and try to find their names. Unfortunately, it looks like that's not going to be possible because, again, these labor contracts meant that these people were not treated as men. They were treated as basically a bulk ethnicity. And because of that, there's no record. But I've been able to show you all of my pictures. I do think that I have been able to somewhat succeed in being able to restore some of the sense of these men being individuals and to really teach about what they were doing on this ship.
There, you're on.
Hi, my name is Jenya Anichenko, and my mission on this project was to be project archaeologist. I'm marine archaeologist. I live in Anchorage, Alaska. My part of my work was to conduct the field work, actually design what we were going to do once we are on site, and how we're going to find the wreck. And my second mission was, once the wreck is found, to document it and preserve it, report to the state of Alaska on this important historic resource. We knew that we were going to work in a very active environment. We knew that this site is exposed to winds and waves and storms. Obviously, it was illustrated by the story of sinking of the Bengal. So we decided to approach that literally from all angles, from under the water, from the surface, and from above. We engaged with sonar research. We used drone mounted magnetometer, and Shawn will tell us more about how that went. And we dove on site. So, and we did do intertidal search of the beach immediately adjacent to the bay we believe Star of Bengal is in. So very briefly, what we found was a lot of evidence that there is a historic wreck in the bay. We saw metal plates, which are consistent with shipbuilding technology, which Star of Bengal would demonstrate. Star of Bengal is really interesting kind of niche in the history of shipbuilding. It's a transition from the wooden ships to the metal hulls, and several artifacts which we observed on the beach kind of illustrated that. So we think we're on the right track. We recorded several targets underwater. Some were visually truthed by dives, and some exist as sonar targets. So I think we're in the right place. However, what I was hoping when I came to this project is that we would locate cohesive elements of a shipwreck, basically fragments of the whole. Historic records tell us that the ship broke into 2-3 parts, and to kind of, I think, everybody's mental vision that we would come across visibly identifiable piece of ship, which unfortunately hasn't happened yet. But we are hopeful for the world. With that, I want to pass it to Shawn to tell us more about some exciting technology which was used inside.
Thank you, Jenya. Good morning. My name is Shawn Adams. I'm a remote sensing and mapping specialist, utilizing various technologies for underwater, on the land, and in the air. My job is to help to identify targets, find things that show potential wreck site, as well as map the area so that we have a good overview of the site and debris fields. We were, I would say, very successful with the underwater imaging, the sonar. As Jenya mentioned, we did find a number of targets. We did manage to ground truth a couple of those targets. Certainly, there are a few more targets that need to be investigated in ground truth. We are also able to map the site. We did a high resolution photogrammetry run, which enabled us to produce a 3D model of the entire bay and debris field that was visible. And then we were also using a magnetometer that we needed to be able to get it to the beach to be able to fly it from the beach, just due to the fact that the ship we're on is a metal ship, and it would cause all kinds of problems for the magnetometer.
What the magnetometer does.
Oh, so the magnetometer, it picks up variations in the Earth's magnetic field, so identifying ferrous targets. So therefore, with the boat or the ship that we're on, the Endeavour, being a metal boat, we had to get to shore. And with all the dynamic environment, the beach is quite a formidable place.
By dynamic environment, you mean the 42 knot winds we were dealing with?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
And the 3 times I nearly died.
Yeah, okay.
So we have some great data moving forward, and we definitely have some more things that we need to check out.
So anything else you guys want to add? Okay, I'll add one last sort of point. We kind of looked at what we found from 2 perspectives. From a historical perspective, using the photographs and the work that Shawn and Tessa did, there's no reasonable doubt that we didn't find the wreck. It was at the spot where the pictures taken a few days later were taken. You could actually see the spars of the ship rising out of the water, and the rocks, as Shawn mentioned, all line up. But we're still looking for that scientific hard proof, that diagnostic evidence that is in fact the star. And we might have it here. Here's a plate. Sorry,
Okay.
I apologize. Rivet holes in a steel iron plate that was on the ship. And we will send this in for metallurgical diagnostics to see if it's the same kind of steel that was used in that shipyard at that time. And if so, that would nail it. That would be the diagnostic evidence we need. So we've got this to send off, and we'll publish results on our website when we get them, as well as all the documents we missed today.
I want to also give a shout out to this entire team, the what I think we call the dynamic environment. We worked in a lot of crazy weather and water conditions, using the Endeavour as our mothership and a rib and a skiff as support boats and shore boats. And the simple act of transporting shore parties to the shore was sometimes rife with danger, I should say. And the whole team was extremely professional, extremely concerned for each other's safety. And
No one died.
No one died, not even Ray.
Well,
Yeah.
nearly, but
I'm impressed with the way the team worked together, the way we coexisted as 8 people on this boat, all working to a similar goal. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, just one final point. Something that you can only get from being at the site really jumped out from the accounts at the time is someone said, "It's amazing anyone survived at all." And I think after being there, even on a clear day, it was fairly dangerous at some points. It really resonated, I think, with everybody. But that must have been an incredible, tragic event. And the fact that there were survivors really speaks to a lot of fortitude and heroism.
Turn back. So I'd like to just wrap by thanking our sponsors and members who made this trip possible. We couldn't do this without you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us today.
Do we have any questions, Crystal? How's Bella?
Can we
How are
put
you
Bella?
doing, Bella?
Oh, there she is.
Bella's boat dog.
She's the best
She's the
researcher among us.
She's
She's
my
the glue.
favorite crew member.
Okay.
A very important part of any expedition. Yes, we do have several questions, actually. So now we move into the, let me share my screen here real quick, into the question and answer period. And let's see here. So here's a question for Tessa. The images that you referred to but were unable to show, were they old pictures of workers?
Yeah, so I have.
They'll go up on the site.
I know, but I have so many documents. So I really want to give a shout out to the Wing Luke Museum in Seattle, also MOHI, Museum of History and Industry, San Francisco Maritime Heritage Marine Park. I have talked to so many wonderful reference librarians and archivists who helped me with the research on this. But essentially what I have is I have photographs of Asian workers on early cannery lines in the early 1900s. I also have some drawings and prints depicting what you would have seen if you went into one of these canneries, where again, you're going to see an almost entirely Asian workforce. I have the original brochure for a machine that I should have mentioned. In 1902, there was an automatic fish butchering machine that was invented. And because Asians were ubiquitous in the workforce, this machine was actually called the iron chink, and it's stamped directly on the side. So I was going to show you the brochures from that. Really, if anyone wants to see more documents than they could ever possibly use, just get in touch with me over email. I'm happy to share on that.
Next question.
Great. Yes, and we will add some of those images to our website, as Bill and Tessa mentioned. And also, if there's anybody who cannot stay through questions and answers, we do have some fascinating ones coming up, but I just want to remind everyone that you can stay in touch with us by going to our website, alaskaendeavour.org, and signing up for subscribing to our log, Captain's Log email. And you can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Okay, the next question is, no one is specified for this question, but it's from Cliff Wilkie, and since many Asian workers died on this ship, are there any members from those same Asian communities actively working on the project?
Take it.
I can feel that one again. So that's what I've been doing the last couple months, is really trying to figure out who those communities are. I've been reaching out to Asian American and Pacific Islander communities in Southeast Alaska, Anchorage, Seattle, and San Francisco, trying to find out who would be the most appropriate community members to be brought on board to be part of this process. I do think we all believe it's very, very important for this to be community driven. What's tricky about it is all of these men who were in the United States in 1908, it's almost certain that they wouldn't have been over here with families. Part of that was because of the immigration laws that restricted Asian women from being over here. So this workforce would have been predominantly single men with no wives, who were very far from home and didn't have familial connections here in the United States. This ship was headed back to San Francisco, which has been one of the main places that I've been trying to put out the word and connect with communities to find descendants. And one of the most enticing documents that I found was in an obscure 1929 shipwreck registry at the University of Washington. I was able to find the insurance payouts made in the aftermath of these deaths. So I do know that there were consular payouts made to the San Francisco consuls for the Chinese, Japanese embassies, and then also a Filipino community club. So I am doing everything I can to address wanting the right communities involved. So if anybody knows or has any leads about who I should talk to, I am casting a wide net and would very, very much love to connect with those communities. So we're trying. It's just really challenging with the data that's available.
And Chris in Seattle is wondering, how deep is the water in this area that you were searching, and wants to know some more about the equipment and techniques used to find the wreckage.
Yeah. The depth of the water was between about 50 and 80 feet, right off of the the edge of the bay. Some of the equipment we used, we brought a lot of the lighter, I'll say the lighter gear for this first round of searching. So we used a side scan sonar in which we mowed the lawn, as they say. So we go back and forth in a grid formation to be able to capture some good images of the ocean floor. And then as far as the drones, we do the similar sort of thing, but it's all automated and programmed. So we put the drone up into the air. I think we flew about 300 feet, in which we used a high resolution mapping camera to capture all of the data to make the 3D model.
And we dove between 50 and I think maybe 15, 20 feet, right? Like the area we visuals.
You want to talk about the diving conditions?
Yeah, and the two of you.
Sure, yeah. It was pretty warm water for Alaska. I think we had what 44 degrees. So it's pretty balmy. It's
44
degrees. It's actually comfortable, and there was a really good swell, and actually we knew there would be swell on the bottom because we could see it on sonar. You could see the sand ripples, which is pretty amazing, at least that. The visibility was unfortunately much less than Geek remembered from his previous dives, because we are in this heavy growth months already, so there was a lot of plankton. Yeah. I think we had about 7 feet. I think we had about 5. Yeah, it was challenging conditions.
Yeah, and also just to add, you know, not knowing the area of the currents, we really had to try and target the dive around slack, which is about the hour around when it changes from a high to a low or to low to high. So during the off times, we deployed an ROV, or a remotely operated vehicle, which is essentially an underwater robot. And, you know, we were able to have a little bit of a look around, but we did notice on the bottom that the currents were exceptionally strong, and to the point of limiting the use of the ROV.
Geek should probably take this too, because it has a dramatic answer to the conditions on this side.
Well, we have a lot of other questions. We should probably move on.
Michael is asking in the chat rather than the Q&A what the current condition of the wreck is. Is that?
It's from what we saw, it's very fragmented. We saw basically lighter structure, lighter elements of a shipwreck, the metal plates from the hull, which were ripped off the ship frames and basically floated towards the shallow depths. And they observed in the tidal area on beach that there were a lot of fragments of plates broken out. So that's what we saw. From that, we could guess that the wreck is heavily affected and probably in bits and pieces. So we are not going to get our Little Mermaid Disney shipwreck out of it once we find it. Can you read the question, please?
Yeah, hasn't Sarah has asked, sorry, Crystal, has an AHRS card been updated or made for the Star of Bengal?
So for people who may not know, that HRS refers to Alaska Historical Survey. Yeah, so it's a database of archaeological sites in the state of Alaska, which is maintained by the Office of History and Archaeology, state of Alaska. Yes, there is a HRS card in this case as an entry. So yes, there is an entry for the Star of Bengal, which has been in the database for a while. We have 5,000 recorded shipwrecks in the state of Alaska, and only probably a dozen of them were looked at or assessed from archaeological point of view. So state has records which are based on historic information about the wrecks, and because you have to anchor it in a map, a lot of times those records are kind of arbitrary attached to the area which is described in the historic record. So it's a very approximate. So that's the case with the card for the Star of Bengal up to this point. So there is a record that's kind of general. It's a polygon on the map, and we will update it, and they will be report based on our research, both historic and archaeological, and that record will be available in this database.
Okay, thank you. And there's a question from Dan Thompson. Are there indications of associated burials on shore? And if so, are there plans to commemorate or map the burials and to monitor their condition given potential coastal erosion?
Mhm. I think I'll have to take it. I want to say that when we planned this expedition, we knew what our schedules are and what's our window of availability is, and we knew we only had 6 days for this whole expedition. So based on the historic records, our expectation for any burial sites would be in uplands, not an intertidal area. And you know, there are historic indications that there are graves in this area. Archaeologically, we are not looking for these graves. We focused on our shipwreck location. This is something which we will hopefully pursue in the future with support of Forest Service, which owns the uplands in this area.
We were limited to the intertidal area.
Yeah, we worked on intertidal and underwater on Alaska state permit.
Okay, we have a question, a comment from Catherine, who says, thank you for all your great work. I'm wondering if the group has considered listing the Star of Bengal and associated grave sites in the National Register of Historic Places. And she was interested in efforts to create a site plan of the wreckage.
It's a really good question. Yes, we are thinking about this. We're talking with state archaeologist and state historian about potential. I personally would like to know a little more about the site before we engage into this undertaking, but that's ultimate goal, definitely. Another thing which I want to mention, and Geek would be a good person to talk about this, is as far as the potential for the site is, Wrangell is really interested in having a memorial in Wrangell dedicated to the wreck, and hopefully you can tell us more about this, Geek.
Okay, well, Wrangell has created the Wrangell Mariners Memorial, and we have always been very interested in the people that were lost at sea, and particularly, you know, the Star of Bengal is a very historically important thing for not only Wrangell but for the fishing industry. And our intention is to do a Star of Bengal memorial at our Wrangell Mariners Memorial. So a separate thing that, and you know, we haven't designed or created it yet, but we're very, very interested in finding as many people that are lost as possible. So that's a long-term goal, and including each one of those in an individual plaque on a wall.
Another question, Crystal?
Yeah, from John Rhodes, he's asking, at the beginning, it was said that the ship was a schooner. The photo appears to be a bark-rigged ship. Comments?
Yeah, it was converted from a schooner to a bark. So we've got photographs of it in both conditions.
Alaska Packers basically rigged all their ships as barks. It was just
Well, the barks were easier to run.
Yeah.
They were slower, but needed fewer crew members.
less people to run.
And Clarence has a couple of related questions. Was anyone rescued by the other two boats? And have you heard from any descendants of any of the people on the ship?
So the tugs did go back the next day and pulled survivors off the shore. And one of the tug captains descendants is very active in the Puget Sound Historical Society, Maritime Society, and left some artifacts and some records with them. But that's the extent. If there are more, I'm not aware of them at this time.
And that's one of the research rabbit holes that I'm still pursuing. I think Shawn and I, we've come to have a mutual research admiration team over here. And I am basically trying to track down anyone that I can who is a descendant, because I really think it's been fascinating sort of seeing the difference between, you know, the myth of this wreck and the historical documents that we have hard data on. And I really want to get more of these oral histories. We have a couple of accounts that have been passed down. Handed us an unpublished survivor's account, and I'm sure that there are more out there. So I am definitely trying to get in touch with descendants. So again, if anyone has any leads on that, please send them my way.
I say that nobody's mentioned the trial that happened. Did you go there at all?
Yeah,
interjection.
mention it.
Well, team research is what I would throw that over to, but there was a trial afterwards, and I don't know all the particulars on that. The research team would know much more about it, but
So there were
I'm tossing Rachel back.
That was great.
Oh, wait, I want to
That-
do
That's me just interjecting, I'm sorry. It's what Rachel does.
But one more shout out to people we really want to thank on this. Ronan Rooney, who is a Wrangell local, he does a podcast called Wrangell History Unlocked, and he has been an extraordinarily generous and thorough researcher. So I wish we had Ronan here to take that question, but I'm gonna let you answer it.
There you go.
Yeah, and the Alaska State Museum, the Alaska State Library, and if you go to the website for the library, you can pull down all the testimony. There were two trials. One where the captain of the Bengal accused the tug captains of basically some very serious charges, including cowardice, which is very, very serious, and for putting the lives in jeopardy. The tug captains were acquitted. A second trial reestablished the captain of the Bengal's rank and license. But there's 108 pages of testimony in one and other testimony in the other. They're online.
Yeah, Cliff Notes version is ultimately no one was held accountable.
The APA did pay right. So the APA assumed responsibility, but none of the specific individuals or the ships or the circumstances, they pretty much came out of the trial intact, and then the APA kind of took over under the hood.
No, I think we've covered that. Any other questions, Kristen?
Yeah, there's a question from Mallory. Are there any plans for any of you to return to the wreck for more research?
Oh. Yes.
Yes, all right, we're working on them.
Yeah, it's a hope. Anybody who knows anything about maritime archaeology or working in Alaska knows it's expensive, and we will have to engage in fundraising, grant writing, and other money-related activities. So if somebody wants to help,
Nudge, nudge.
So we have oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Tessa mentioned a document, an unpublished first-person account of the wreck by a guy named Anderson. That got to us by the Clausen Museum in Petersburg, a small but very vibrant historical museum. And like the Nolan Center here, those are just incredible resources of local history. And I want to thank both of them and everybody else who's working at the small history museums. They really do a service.
So I think we have time for a few more questions, 10 more minutes here. So from Jason, did you determine the extent and distribution of wreckage debris? Is the remote sensing data sufficient to create a site plan?
I would say yes. There's, as I mentioned before, there are a number of targets that still need to be investigated to be able to truly map out the extent of the site. But so we do need to go back and really ground truth a lot of those targets, as well as a little bit more thorough with the magnetometer, just to be able to see if there's other parts that have been covered by sand over time. But we do have a good map and a good feel for the debris wreck site.
So this
Crystal?
may, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, we had a chat question. Has operation been funded? And Bill, do you want to?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we have sponsors of specific expeditions, people who chip in on a particular mission. And then we have our members who at $10 a month support all that we do. That's it. We're not a heavily funded organization, and we depend upon the generosity of our members, sponsors. Any other questions? Oh, somebody's asked here, the Endeavour has no sails, right?
Not anymore.
No, we're a 72-foot steel powerboat with one single diesel, single propeller. So Detroit diesel 8B71, if you care about those things. Built in 1954. It had been built by the U.S. Army, ended up as Alcatraz's transport vessel, taking prisoners and guards back and forth every day, then at McNeil Island Prison, and was bought as government surplus in about 1979 by a guy named Jerry Morris, who did a fantastic job converting it into the research vessel it is today.
Okay, Crystal, back to you.
Yeah, Natasha has a comment. I'm hoping that there will be future Zooms with updates on the research. Are there any plans to do that? And can you please send out emails when those are set up?
We will sign up as a member or a free subscriber, and you'll get all of our announcements.
Maybe we can have another one where we have all the visuals.
Yeah, sorry about that, everybody.
I've just got to say that photograph that we tried to show you earlier was really a profound aha moment for me when we were on. You had indicated we should go ashore and try to line those rocks up, and the landscape has changed, the seascape has changed, that shoreline has changed, but these rocks, some of them are very, very distinctive. And we searched, and there was a moment we had the historic photo, and we looked at the rocks, and Tessa and I were right there, and it just like it was
Unmistakable.
It was unmistakable,
Jaw dropping.
jaw dropping, and this is a historic photo that actually shows the wreck, the mass poking out behind these rocks. And we found those rocks, and that for me was the first, like, just chill went down my spine. But I've also got to emphasize too that it is treacherous to get on and off. And I know I'm coming around to my near-death experiences, but I just want to emphasize it's an unsafe environment out there. This is not easily accessed. It's not a walk in the park at all. It's dangerous to get out there. And I really want to thank the crew of the Endeavour, Bill and Patsy, basically, for
getting us
there,
back,
getting us there safely and getting us back, and Gig Decker, for his passion and dedication to the story for 30 years. So
Thanks, Ray.
I think we have time for a couple more questions. There are a lot of them. From Dan is asking, why were so few Chinese workers able to escape the ship's foundering? Why were they excluded from lifeboats or locked in the hold, possibly?
Okay, so this is one of the points of contention in this story. There are rumors that seem to have surfaced after the fact, kind of in like barroom retellings, that the Chinese workers were locked in the hold, and that is what explains the wild discrepancy in death rate. So I ran the numbers on this with all of the really differing accounts of how many both white and Asian people died. And so about 90% of the Asians on board died, and about 40 to 50% of the crew did. So that was part of, I would say, the main focus of what I was personally trying to find on this research trail. There are multiple accounts, not necessarily about the Bengal, but the practice of locking passengers in the hold during rough seas, so that essentially the people who were qualified to know how to try and save the ship would be able to do their jobs in a really chaotic environment. We don't have any evidence that we can trace in this case of that happening. It seems like most of those assertions about the Asian workers being locked in the hold were happening after the fact. And I have heard of the existence of documents from survivors and descendants that make that assertion, but I haven't been able to find a paper trail on that. So we really can't say with any certainty what did or did not happen in this wreck, but I think something that we all felt after going to the site, I would say the majority of us did eventually make it to the beach for shore landings, but we sometimes had to have 3 or 4 attempts to even get us close enough to get up on the shore. And the conditions that these men were facing, all of them, it really is pretty amazing that there were any survivors in the slightest. So I wish I could give you a definitive answer, but I can't.
Thanks. And we have another question asking about the specific precise location of the shipwreck, the latitude and longitude. Is that something that's shareable, or are we protecting that information?
It's not something which we'll share with general public. This information, the location of the Star of Bengal, the site we think is Star of Bengal, is Alaska state land, and this site is protected by Alaska state laws. So these coordinates from this project will be going to Alaska Office of History and Archaeology and will be available to qualified professionals. I think that's exact quote from their website. We don't want to share with coordinates to protect us.
And I'd go a little further and say this isn't the kind of place, Coronation Island in general, and this in particular, that you'd casually go out to on a weekend and drop a line in the water. So just please keep that in mind, that it's a rough area that even folks in Wrangell and in the area avoid. And they understand the sea a lot better than I do.
So maybe time for one final question from Michael. Did you use ROVs to dive the site or human divers?
We actually attempted both a couple of times, but yeah, there was a dive as well as ROV usage.
One last question. Pick the very best one.
Let's see here. Oh, you mentioned matching the steel you recovered to what was used in the shipyard at the time of her construction. How did you find out what the shipyard was using?
We don't know yet.
It's
But
still in existence.
yeah, the shipyard's still in existence, but their samples, there's basically a library of metal samples, and we will enlist the help of some specialists to match the metal we recovered to the library. We may be able to get some help from the Explorers Club on that. We don't know how long it'll take, but when we get the results, we'll post them.
Okay, wonderful. I think that's about all the time we have for questions. And I understand we're going to add some more information to the Star of Bengal expedition page on our website, alaskaendeavour.org. So we'll be able to share some of those images and more information that we weren't able to share today. Sorry about that. And are any final words, Patsy or Bill, before I wrap things up?
Well, again, thanks to everybody who tuned in to the webinar. We really appreciate the opportunity to describe the work, to describe the results. I will say, again, thank you to this entire team. So impressed with everybody. And we're looking forward to future expeditions to continue to work.
Our very next expedition, as a matter of fact, is in about a week. It's a completely different sort of expedition. We're going up to Teneke Inlet to meet with Molly Kemp and her team, who have been studying salmon streams up there for decades. They've been measuring the temperatures of the various streams and have identified which ones are likely to be cold enough to support the salmon as the climate changes. So we'll interview her and her team and post that on our site, perhaps do a webinar. Thanks to all of our members, all of our supporters, all of our subscribers. See you next time.
And we want to encourage you to keep following along on the adventure. You can subscribe to email updates so not to miss any of the webinars by going to alaskaendeavour.org/subscribe. That's also where you can become a member and support this work if you'd like. But we'd love for you to stay in touch and become part of the community Alaska Endeavour is on Facebook and Instagram. Thanks everybody for your great questions. Thanks to the expedition team. This was fantastic. Really appreciate it very much. I hope to see you all next time. Thanks again. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.
Right.